This morning readings comes from Luke chapter 14, verses 1 and verses 7 through 14. One Sabbath, when Jesus came to eat a meal in the house of the leading Pharisees, the guests watched him closely. Jesus went on to address the parable to the guests, noticing that they were trying to get a place of honor at the table. Jesus said, "When you're invited to a wedding party, don't sit at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished has been invited. Otherwise, the host might come and say to you, 'Make room for this person,' and you would have to proceed in shame to the lowest place. What you should do is go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your hosts approach you, they'll say, 'My friend, come up higher.' This will win you to the esteem of other guests, for all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Then Jesus said to the host, "Whenever you give a lunch or a dinner, don't invite your friends or colleagues or relatives or wealthy neighbors. They might invite you in return and repay you. No, when you have a reception, invite those who are poor or have physical infirmities or are blind. You should be pleased that they don't repay you and they can't repay you, for you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the just."
I wonder if you've seen the new television series on Apple TV called The Studio. This series follows a fictional Hollywood movie studio called Continental Studios. It's been around for a long time, and it's striving to survive in this new world of streaming and blockbuster hits. That might be familiar. And this world appears to be increasingly difficult for both the art of movies and the business of movie making to live together. So this series stars Seth Rogen, who plays a stressed out movie bigwig. And to intensify the drama, the movie industry is in decline. So there's a scene in one of the episodes where the studio head, Seth Rogen, his character's name is Matt Remick, is at the Academy Awards. He's talking to Zoe Kravitz, and yes, that's Zoe Kravitz, they're playing Zoe Kravitz. He's talking to her backstage and trying to convince her to be sure and thank him in her acceptance speech before she wins an Oscar. Well, she tells him how her speech is going to go, and he gets more and more worked up the more he realizes that she is not going to thank him. Meanwhile, you know what's coming, he notices that every time someone from a Netflix show wins, they are sure to thank the head of Netflix. So Matt gets up to go to the bathroom, and while he's there, he runs into the head of the Netflix studio. And so in the bathroom, Matt asks the guy from Netflix how he gets all of the talent to thank him. And the guy says, it's geniusly simple. He forces them to by writing it into their contract. That's one way to get a thanks. So a little bit of Hollywood behind the curtain. One of the things the scene in that episode points to is that the character felt he needed to be honored in front of others. It's also why I have trouble sometimes when I attend dinner parties. And what I am accustomed to is that I go in and there is a living room area or a den area where people can find a place on a couch or a chair where we can all just sit and relax and have conversation and be ourselves. We can allow the conversation to go where it goes. And the host entertains and the guests enjoy the host's hospitality. There's nothing wrong with that. If I have trouble, though, it's with that awkward move to the dinner table. It's that whole seating arrangement thing that usually gets me. I mean, for one thing, I don't want to sit where someone else normally sits to eat. I'm talking about the host here, right? And secondly, I attend these things without the company of a partner. So I want to give those there as couples the opportunity to sit together, if they choose and if they can stand to sit together. And another thing, I don't feel comfortable being placed at a noteworthy position at the table just because I happen to be a minister or a pastor. And perhaps even most telling, I am just a humble person by nature. And so I'm just happy to be there at the table. So when it comes to things like that, you'll have to help me out if I'm going to be there. Oh, Mike, you can sit here. Thank you. All right. And our gospel lesson for the day, it's the Sabbath. And Jesus has been invited to the home of one of the religious figures after worship. It's an interesting invitation because he's already made a bit of a scene by healing someone on a previous Sabbath day of devotion and rest. And I think he's aware that this invitation doesn't necessarily come from a place of love, if you know what I mean. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But in any case, Jesus goes. And while he's there, he notices how the guests are choosing to seat themselves in places of honor. Now, that word translated as places of honor literally means the first couches or the chief couches. Keep in mind that this was an honor-shame culture these folks were going to be lounging about. And so Jesus has something to say about the matter. And having noticed how the people there strategized to sit themselves at the most prominent positions at the banquet, Jesus reminds them of something they will have heard before. It's a quote from Proverbs that says, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case that seat has been reserved for someone more distinguished than you." And Jesus is not telling the folks there something they do not already know. You see, in Israel, as in other cultures in the ancient Near East, places at the meal table were closely tied to one's social standing. There was a certain pecking order at work and on display. Places at the table were something like chairs in a band. They all showed rank. And so the religious leaders who were in attendance at this particular meal operated on the principle that one's position at the table reflected one's position in life. And what's interesting about this meal and this story in particular is that what these religious leaders are trying to do is to take a higher place at the table to in turn create a more favorable position in life. So the people in this scene are in effect jockeying for position at the dinner table in order to end up in a seat of honor. It's not terribly difficult to imagine what the scene might have looked like. Individuals are milling about in a casual manner in the hopes that they might happen to be standing beside a chair of importance when it comes time for dinner. A little bit like that game of musical chairs and not wanting to be the last one standing. How subtle it was all supposed to be, that is, until Jesus said something and made it awkward for them. But the interesting thing with this story is that he's not necessarily saying don't honor someone. No, that definitely needs to happen in a kingdom full of servants. What he's responding to is the quest to affirm or create social status through the jockeying for position. So Jesus advises them that they should consider not seeking the place of honor, because chances are they'll just get humiliated in doing so. It would be better instead to take the lowest place and then be invited by the host to move to a different and perhaps better place at the table. And if we know anything about the way of Jesus, it is that the way up is down. That to try to work up is to risk being put down. And so the whole point Jesus is trying to make is that honor comes from a place of humility, and that humiliation comes from a quest for honor. So Jesus recognized the realities of such an honor-shame culture and advised against taking the first seats. And because honor was socially determined in that day and time, if one's claim to honor failed to be reciprocated by one's audience, then public humiliation followed. It is better, Jesus says, to have honor bestowed on you by another than to risk making a bid for honor that may not be granted. Jesus taught that it was more gratifying to instead be invited to a place of greater importance. And what is being conveyed here is indeed a paradox, and something that can only be perceived through the eyes of faith. That the way up is down and down is up. It takes faith to believe that what seems like doing the opposite will yield in time the intended result. And Scripture is filled with such admonitions, like the key to having lies in the act of giving away. The key to greatness comes through serving others. And the key to faith is having conviction without the proof. And in this case, that greatness or honor comes not through self-elevation, but through humility and faith in God. God's reign is like a quest for the lowest place at the table, but not for the sake of social advancement in some sacred order or hierarchy of society. No, the sacred order of God's reign over God's kingdom dismantles the very idea of a status-structured society. Imagine that if the spaces typically reserved for those who were ambitiously seeking status were made to be open because such folks were taking the low places at the end of the table. And what if somehow that opened up a world of possibility where those who were always excluded from the table, the impoverished, the marginalized, and the ones who have been left behind, were suddenly there at the table? And not just at that table, but within earshot of the host, able to talk about why they've been put in these positions in life. Perhaps there is something to learn there. And now imagine a world where something could be done about it. Jesus said that God's kingdom is a place of genuine humility, and that genuine humility does not serve today for the sake of exaltation tomorrow, but rather genuine humility means getting out of the maneuvering for honor and exaltation game altogether, and instead working to build a more just world for all. Humility is a quality of life open to persons who know that their worth is not measured by recognition from their peers, but by the certainty that God has accepted them. And while attempts at exaltation may come in all sorts of disguises, the sacred order of God's dawning kingdom of love dismantles these status structures of the world. At God's great banquet of possibility, the rich and the powerful, the privileged and prestigious won't sit at the head of the table. That spot is reserved for those who never got a place at the table, in order that everyone can come to the table. And that's just how big God's table is. Jesus sends us out into the world, not seeking out the places of honor in order to be exalted now, nor to sit at the lowest place in order to be exalted later. Jesus sends us out with a different kind of approach to life, with a different kind of purpose. It's a journey where being exalted isn't the goal at all. The goal, in a word, is love. And not just any love. Jesus envisions a love freed from all crass attempts at scoring points, at earning a place at the table and earning God's presence in our lives. And God is always there, and God invites God's holy love, which is a love for its own sake, without ulterior motive, without scheme or advantage, without a quid pro quo. It's an unconditional love, a love without condition, a truly generous love, and love that does not seek to be repaid. For that kind of love, free from all need for condition and compensation, that is the love God has and God gives to us. Amen.